Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Restaurants Canada webinar on COVID and the impacts in Nova Scotia and an update for food service operators. My name is Luke Urshevek. I'm Vice President, Atlantic Canada for Restaurants Canada, and happy to be sharing our information with you today. You know, it's great. It's finally a sunny day. We've got rid of the snow, and maybe it's going to breed a little optimism into the industry, because we all know we need a little after the last 6 weeks. We've really lived in unprecedented times since March 15th, where our industry has been ordered to close, and you know, the industry is suffering. You know, as Restaurants Canada, you know, your representative to governments, you know, we really have a threefold job to do in terms of the crisis and the impact on restaurants. You know, first of all, we're here for you to bring, you know, the impacts of the industry and what is happening in the industry to decision makers and government, so they can be aware of how drastic our industry has been hit by the closures. You know, you would have seen a lot of our social media posts, our press releases, and as well as, you know, constant communication with government officials. You know, our second role was to work closely with government on measures to assist the industry as we go from crisis to managing it to hopefully the recovery phase. And we have a team in Toronto, in Ottawa, Halifax, Vancouver, and Quebec, you know, are working with governments at every single province and the federal government to deliver programs, as well as tweak them as they come along, because we've all seen how it has generally worked. The government has made announced a program. It's several weeks to get to to what happens, and they change it and tweak it as it moves along. And that's a lot of times where we're getting the feedback from you, the members, on how these programs do work or don't work for you. And we've been able to get adjustments. You know, our last role, which we're fully engaged in now, is to work with governments on plans, you know, for recovery and reopen. You know, we had provinces such as Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island have all tentatively announced recovery reopening plans. And, you know, we're going to be in that position in the next couple of weeks. And we want to make sure government understands, you know, our businesses, how our businesses work, what we need to operate, as well as design, you know, plans and procedures for our industry to open, you know, feasibly and safely. Moving on, I guess, Roberto. You know, first thing, you know, this is a little bit of the past, but I think it'd be interesting for members to understand where we were and where we are. We survey our members regularly, and the responses of these surveys are approximately from about 13,000 restaurants from coast to coast. And the numbers in Nova Scotia are very similar to what we're seeing nationally. When we surveyed members in mid-February, they were telling us the economy had slowed down. They could feel it as mostly due to, you know, increased debt, a little bit of a slowdown in the economy. There really wasn't much of an impact of coronavirus at that point. We had seen a little bit of a decline, and most impacted in Chinese restaurants in Western Canada and Toronto. But otherwise, we really didn't see a lot of change in business. When we surveyed a month later, after the first 2 weekends, the first 2 weeks of March, you know, 78% of operators saw lower same-store sales. At that point, you know, coronavirus had become a topic. Consumers were beginning to be scared, and that was just at the point when restaurants were starting to order closed. Moving on to the end of March and into April, we saw a dramatic impact in same-store sales. We saw, you know, nearly 100% of operators say their business had lowered. You know, God knows, I don't know who were the ones who said they actually increased over those periods. But generally, what we've seen when we talk to members and we survey members was on average, we've seen about an 80% decline in the business. Next slide. So the first half of March, as I mentioned earlier, things had started to slow down. Coronavirus started to be out there. We're hearing public was about scared to go to restaurants, and we had declines of about 30%. The second half of March, when the closures took place, we experienced about a 73% decline overall in sales. And that worked out to be, either 100% for restaurants who were closed, quick service restaurants, more of the chain quick service were experiencing somewhere between a 50 and 60% loss. And those just doing takeout were working at somewhere in the range of an 85% drop in sales. So really some tough numbers to try to work with. When we look what are happening with operations, 50% of businesses temporarily closed down. About 40% had moved to takeout and delivery only, and 8% had closed permanently. And that was just after, the first couple weeks of April. So it was really got quite a dramatic decline. And, unfortunately, to see 8% of businesses closed permanently after that short time period is really quite scary. Since that time, I think we've seen a number of particularly full service restaurants starting to change their operations and gear their operations towards a little bit of takeout and delivery. While it's, it generally runs at a break even or a loss, I think we're all realizing that this crisis is going to go on for a lot longer than we expected. And there's a need for operators to keep their businesses either in hot idle by starting to do takeout and delivery. Next up. So what I'm going to do at this point is just go quickly through the responses of governments at both the federal level and the provincial level, and talk to you about some of the programs that have been introduced. And at the end of this presentation, I'm happy to take questions. You can jot your questions down and I'll answer them the best I can. Some of the federal measures, we did a webinar last week and you may have attended. So I'll try to go over them quite quickly and spend some time on the ones where there have been some updates, but generally try to breeze through them as quick as I can. But as I said, feel free to ask any questions on these. The first, at the federal level, our first goal was the supply chain. We had to make sure borders remained open. We still had access to products. Restaurants were deemed an essential service because we took pressure off the supply chain. We were feeding first responders. We were feeding essential workers. We were feeding medical workers. We were feeding people who were in quarantine or self-isolating. So there really was a role for us, and we had to make sure that the supply chain was intact. Once that happened and government worked with us on that, that's when some of the emergency measures started to come in to support both individuals and businesses. First out of the gate was a CERB, and I think most of you are fully aware of this. This is a $2,000 taxable benefit that's available for 4 months for workers who lose their income as a result of the pandemic. To qualify, the employee has to be, either laid off or don't have work because of the impact of COVID. They had to have earned $5,000. And a key thing is, they cannot collect it if they quit. So that was something that we had asked for because we didn't want to see our employees quit their jobs, to go unserved. And another change that we were able to successfully get implemented in the CERB is, there was a fear of workers who were particularly low-wage workers, the reluctance to come back to work if they could earn $2,000 while on benefit. Government had changed it and allowed employees to earn up to $1,000 per month while collecting CERB. So that would allow them to continue to work some shifts for you while collecting CERB, as your business ramps up. This program was retroactive to March 15th, and it's eligible for 4 months. Next up on the list was the CEBA, Canadian Emergency Business Account. This is probably the program that most of you have accessed. It's a pretty good program. It has changed quite dramatically over the first month it's been in place. These are loans to small businesses to pay operating costs such as payroll, rent, utilities, insurance, property tax, or debt service. They're 100% funded by government. Initially, the cap on this program was up to $1 million. We successfully lobbied to have this increase to 1.5 million in total payroll. And another caveat that was changed as a result of our efforts was the ability for establishments that sell over 50% of their sales in alcohol to qualify for this benefits. It's available through your financial institute, interest-free loans up to $40,000. And if you repay it by December 31st, 2022, 25% or $10,000 of it will be forgiven. Balances that have not been repaid by the beginning of 2023 will be converted to a 3-year term loan at 5%. Next up is an EDC loan. These are generally geared up for bigger businesses that don't qualify for CEBA, and it allows for cash flow and loans up to $6.25 million and guaranteed by 80% by EDC. But that is not used by very many food service operators. After that, we have the one that probably most people have been talking about, which is a rental assistance program. Rent is the #1 fixed cost for most restaurant operators, either your rent or your mortgage cost. Something we heard a lot about from members in terms of the inability to pay rent when you have zero or very, very little revenue coming in. We were very aggressive in terms of our media campaigns and our lobby campaigns on this effort, and we're pleased that government came up with this program. What's key to this program is they had to get the 10 provinces on side, because the federal government does not have any jurisdiction over rent because it is a provincial jurisdiction. This program and the details of this program are not completely in place. There's still a work in progress, and we expect it to be rolled out in mid-May. So what this program does, it provides a forgivable loan to commercial property owners that would cover 50% of the monthly rent payments for tenants for the months of April, May, and June. To be eligible for this, the tenants must pay less than $50,000 per month in rent and have temporarily closed or experienced a 70% drop in pre-COVID revenues. How this works is the landlord will reduce their rent to the tenant by 75%. The tenant will still have to pay 25%, and then the federal government will repay 50% of the rent to the landlord. So essentially, everyone's taking a little bit of a haircut on this. The landlords are going to lose 25% of their rent, and the tenants will still have to pay 25% of the rent, and government will pay the rest. I know there are a lot of issues with this program. #1 being the willingness of landlords to participate. It requires them to participate. It is not mandatory because the federal government does not have jurisdiction over them. We're doing all we can do and working with governments to try to come up with solutions for tenants where the landlord won't play ball. I guess the most compelling feature for a landlord is, it's probably better to get 75% of rent with at risk putting all the rent. So that is probably the most compelling argument. We've also had another comments from operators where if the remaining be open and they're only down 50, 60% in sales, they're not eligible. Once again, these are concerns we're bringing to government, and we hope when we get the finalized version in mid-May that some of these things can be brought into account. Next up, we have the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. This is another one that most operators hope to be using. This is where businesses experience a 30% or more drop due to COVID. They will be eligible for a 75% wage subsidy. This has come a long way from the initial proposal, if you remember, where it was only a 10% wage subsidy. Working with other business organizations, we've successfully able to move this up to a 75% wage subsidy. Another tweak that government made to this program was that, in terms of using it for March, since closures only took place mid-March, you just had to demonstrate a 15% decline in revenues. For businesses that might not have been open or relatively new businesses, you're also able to average your January and February revenue declines to your revenue to show your decline for March. How this works is government has broken the your payment of your wages into 4-week increments, and you are eligible for up to 12 weeks of wage subsidy. And the available period at this time is from March 15th to June 6th. So you are available to get the wage subsidy in 4-week increments from now until June 6th. And so once you apply for a 4-week increment with the qualification, you'll automatically be accepted for the next 4-week period and the next 4-week period. During part of the announcement, what government also did was they extended this program up to October 3rd. So they're saying we can have a wage subsidy program up to and including October 3rd. But at this point, we're only going to pay people for the period from March 15th to June 3rd. So why they did that? Because they don't know how long the recovery could be. If the recovery goes longer, it gives them the ability to extend the program past June 6th without having to go back to Parliament to make changes. So, the other thing, so we've had lots of questions from members who say, I've closed in March or I'm closed in April, I'm only going to open in May. I can only collect the subsidy for 5 weeks because it goes from, May to the first week of June. That is correct at this point, but there's always the possibility that it will get extended. The ability of having the beauty of having a October 3rd date is that you're able in, July or August, September to go back and apply for the wage subsidy for those periods between March 15th and June 6th. So you can go back retroactively to claim it. Unfortunately, at this time, the only period you can claim it for is March 15th to June 3rd, or June 6th, sorry. So what some operators are doing, those who are just working with a skeleton staff, maybe a couple people at this point, they're just holding their power dry and they're waiting till May or something to see how it pans out. Because if they do extend the program, they'll have 12 weeks that begin May and hopefully go forward into June or July. And if they don't extend the program, they can always go back in July and claim for the period where they had a skeleton staff. So it's a bit confusing, but government wanted to give themselves maximum flexibility in terms of expanding it or moving it towards seasonal businesses or tourism businesses, but at the same time, they wanted to limit it to a 12-week period. Next up, Roberto. Other federal government supports, just worth mentioning, your HST remittances were deferred until June 30th. We're lobbying governments, along with the Hotel Association and the Tourism Association, to allow us to keep that first quarter remittance to use it in our businesses. You know, it would be really difficult to try to get back payments that have already been submitted to government, but since you still hold those remittances, we're trying to figure out a way to allow those to keep those. Income tax payments have also been deferred until August 31st, and the work sharing program from the federal government has been extended from 38 weeks to 38 weeks to 76 weeks. Maybe at this point I will stop for a second and look at some of the questions I received, and before I move on to Provincial. So the first question is a wage subsidy on wages earned from March 15th to April 11th or on wages paid? So it would be available for any wages paid between that period. So, you know, it would include, you know, whatever taxable income that the employee is paid. So if they're, so I hope, you know, hopefully that clarifies that. It's what you paid to them. Next question, if you have a payroll that runs from March 1st to 15th and the pay date is March 20th, would you use the amount of wages you paid on March 20th, or is it on wages earned beginning on March 15th? So for the calculation of what you paid someone, it's the average, their average weekly earnings on the period from January 1st to March 15th. That's how you establish what their average earnings were. It's not what they made the previous week. You take the period from January 1st right up until March 15th, average your weekly earnings, and that's the number you use. Okay, moving on to Nova Scotia and Nova Scotia supports. You know, just editorializing a little bit. You know, Nova Scotia was quite quick out of the gate in terms of bringing programs out. They were a lot more nimble, a lot faster than some of the federal programs, and they really have been an open government to work with and have listened and, you know, have made a number of things that we had asked for, and you know, been very responsive to the needs of the industry. You know, the first things that they did, which is very important to us, was in the emergency order, they made restaurants, takeout and delivery an essential service so that you could still operate. They didn't shut us down completely. They also introduced us the ability for us to sell alcohol with takeout and delivery. It's beer and wine for takeout, with but does not include third-party delivery. Something that the government actually did the second day after they closed us down was, and this one is thanks to a member who suggested that to me, was they closed down bars and VLT machines on the Sunday. On the Monday morning, I had a call from an operator who said, "Hey, they're going to take the wages of Atlantic Lottery out of our machines on Wednesday. Why don't you ask them to keep that in our accounts that we can use it for cash flow?" So the government of Nova Scotia was very responsive, and by that afternoon, we were able to get Atlantic Lottery, get 4 provinces and Atlantic Lottery to agree to leave the wages from the VLTs in the accounts of the site holders so they could use them for cash flow. That's particularly important because sometimes these establishments that tend to be more alcohol heavy in sales aren't eligible for some of the loan programs through their banks. So that was something that was very important. And it will be paid, you will get the ability to pay it back out of future commissions. They're not going to demand all the money back by a certain date. Another thing that Nova Scotia did that was quite interesting was, only one or two provinces in Canada to do was protected tenants, commercial tenants from lockout and asset seizure. So, in order for a landlord to lock you out or seize your assets, they would have to go to court. And since the courts are closed, the government essentially said, good luck to them. So we were one of the two provinces to do that. The idea behind that, it was a way to get the landlords to the table to use the rent deferral program, where government had developed a template of what a deferral program could look like, would save the legal costs for restaurant operators and get discussions going. And the province guaranteed $5,000 per month for up to 3 months to the landlord should the tenant not be able to pay. The government also extended all license fees and permits up until June 30th. They deferred workers' compensation premiums until June, and payments on any government loans were deferred until June 30th. Next up, Roberto. Government also introduced a number of assistance programs to help businesses quickly. These programs were out very quickly before the federal government got going, so many of them were quite easy to access. The first is a small business loan guarantee program. It's up to $500,000 through the credit union, where the government guarantees the first $100,000 of the loan. Interest and principal payments were deferred until June 30th. The only caveat that, the caveats that impacted us were you had to prove your business case and be a viable business. And the idea of you were not able to get this loan if more than 51% of your sales were alcohol. Government also introduced a small business impact grant. This is a one-time $5,000 grant to small businesses that you can use for absolutely any purpose. You had to show that you had a 15% revenue drop, the grant maximized up to 15% of your revenue. You had to show a 30% revenue loss in April and be closed or reduced operations through COVID. And as I said, it could be used for any purposes. And, government gave, several thousand of these grants. Government also just recently introduced, just a couple days ago, the Small Business Credit Support Program. This probably won't apply to most business operators. This was really geared for those who did not qualify for the federal CEBA program. So it's for companies with less than $20,000 payroll. If they have less than $20,000 payroll, they can get up to $25,000 loan, and the first $1,500 of it is a grant. Next up, Roberto. So now that I've gone through some of the programs that the federal governments and provincial governments have introduced, I want to spend a little time about what's happening now and reopening. As I said earlier, provinces such as PEI and New Brunswick and Saskatchewan have all announced reopening plans. Some of them have firm dates. Most are based on a phased process where phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and if certain conditions happen in phase 1, we then move to phase 2 and so on and so on. So the province, Nova Scotia, has not released its reopening plan yet. We have a lot more cases of COVID than some of our neighboring provinces. We have not seen a decline in cases like New Brunswick and PEI. Hence, it's taking us a little longer to come up with a plan. It's clear from our discussion at government that things will not go back to normal. It will not be, okay, restaurants can open, go do your business as per usual. That is not going to happen. It's going to be more of a phased-in approach. Will there be limits on your capacity? There'll be physical distances requirements. and there'll be risk reduction measures in place. You'll have to have signage, you'll have to have hygiene standards and disinfecting standards, and and physical distancing. And really, certain types of behavior will probably, or certain types of activities will not be allowed for quite a a foreseeable time. For example, in New Brunswick, they expect restaurants to open in 2 to 4 weeks, but they're saying, dance clubs or that type of activity won't be able to open until December. So, and how they've done it in New Brunswick, which I'm hoping that it will be the same in Nova Scotia, what we're speaking to them about, it won't be based on your liquor license type or whether you're serving food or you're not serving food. It will be, if we can meet these requirements in terms of activities, you should be able to remain open and serve customers. I'd give you an example would be, if you're a pub, you're probably not going to be able to have a band and a dance floor that's packed with people dancing together. But if you're a pub and you have some entertainment where people are seated and social distances in place, they could sit there and drink, and it wouldn't matter, what type of license you have. It would be the type of activity that would limit, the type of activity would be limiting, not the type of license you have or what products you're serving. So as I said, we're actively engaged with government on this reopening plan. We hope to have to them by tomorrow a framework, our final version of a framework on how we foresee businesses in food service establishments beginning to open. And with that, we will include which we've produced, is a rapid recovery guide, which would really be a guidance document for you, the business operators, and which would give you checklists on what you need to do, what are best practices, what restrictions should you put in place. It'll be everything from cleaning to masks to washrooms to activities, and it really is a guide that we've developed by looking what's happening in the United States, internationally, and across Canada, that has been fully vetted by a group of food service operators from a number of different sectors to make sure we can really design the best in practice document that'll help you, the operators, reopen. And as I say, reopen is a term that is I'm using loosely because reopening will not be like it was in February. There will be restrictions. Once again, citing some of the things, looking at a province like PEI, their reopenings, it would, talks about, no pool tables, no dancing, you can't share dishes, you can't share utensils, you can only dine with people within your household, and, no one from outside of PEI can dine in a restaurant. Those are the type of restrictions they're looking at in the first phase. And as we learn more, as things progress, the restrictions will get looser and looser. I guess my message to you is it's not going to be quick. If you have concerns, you have ideas, please forward them to us. We hope to have this rapid recovery guide available to you early next week, so you can look at it and determine how you want to, adjust your business, because there will be, social distancing required. You may want to change the way your tables are laid out, or how you operate to meet the new normal, because it's been very clear from discussion with health officials, we're not going to get back to normal until we have a vaccine, which could be a year away. So also, other things that, when we've talked about the recovery, we're also very much engaged with both the federal and provincial governments in terms of what we can do, once we reopen. We talked about the risk mitigations, but also with that would be things like continued assistance. If we're going to be a sector that is going to be, our capacity is going to be reduced, you know, we're still going to need assistance that doesn't end June 6th, you know, in terms of wage subsidies, rent deferrals, you know, the waiving of rents. And, you know, that falls suit with you know, everything from municipal taxes to licenses to other taxes. You know, we cannot simply just defer all these expenses till, you know, some date in August or September and say, okay, you have to pay them now. We're going to need a lot of these waived. And, you know, part of our job is going to be bringing the message to government that assistance is going to happen, you know, for the medium to longer term. It is not simply assistance for 2 months. It's going to go on as long as our industry is faced under restrictions. And last but not least, we're engaged with governments in terms of what we can do to, you know, to market our industry, you know, to locals within Canada. You know, restrictions will loosen at some point this summer. We're probably not going to have a lot of international tourists, but, you know, are there things we can do with our own, you know, staycation, our home tourists to encourage people to come back to restaurants, support what we do. In the short term, you know, I've encouraged all of you to get involved in CanadaTakeout.com. This is a group we're in partnership with to promote the Great Canadian Takeout Day. And, you know, today is Takeout Day. And if you register for free on this website at CanadaTakeout.com, your restaurant will get listed on a map. So when someone goes in and punches in their postal code, they will see your restaurant and hopefully order from you. So at that point, I'm going to stop and I will answer some of these questions and feel free to send some of them forward. So we have a question on the rent deferral. The question is a rental assistance, you know, net or what's included in it? You know, at this point, we still don't have the details. It's something we're working on with the federal governments. We want to make it as favorable as we can to the restaurant owner. So that is, you know, that's the premise we're working from. So those details have not yet been released. The other one is about the wage subsidy loan program. No, on the wage subsidy, you have to fall between the $20,000 and $1.5 million payroll. If you fall outside of those parameters, less than 20,000 or more than 1.5 million, you will not qualify. Happy to take any other questions, or if you don't have any at this time or you'd like some more clarity, I think, Roberto, there's an email address on the webinar. Feel free to send me an email, or, you know, I probably know a lot of you. Give me a call, 902-425-8190, and, you know, I will try to give you the answer. And if I can't find the answer, I will try to find it for you. Happy to take any comments, any direction. And as I said, we hope to have this recovery plan available for you sometime in the next couple of days. So at that point, I will say goodbye and good luck. And, you know, we will continue to be there for you in terms of bringing your concerns, bringing your issues to government each and every day. Thank you.